All right, Mr. Francie, we are joined by an incredible guest today, and I'm super pumped. Patrick, who do we have here today?
Well, listen, I'm honored, as always, to introduce Dr. Sherry Cooper, who is really a Canadian/American economist. She's the chief economist for Dominion Lending Services, good friends of the Real Estate Investment Network. Sherry has been on our stage on more than one occasion. I had her on my podcast on the Everyday Millionaire. She is an amazing economist that speaks in our language, that we align with her views of the world because we can trust them. She's very thorough. So, Dr. Cooper, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. Great to be here.
So now, Sherry, let's talk about this. You're going to be speaking. You're one of our amazing keynote speakers at the Rethink Real Estate Conference, which is coming up on January 22nd. It's a full, just about a full day event. Patrick, if you remember, this started out by being a half day event, and then we just continued to add amazing speaker after amazing speaker, and now it turned out to be just about a full day event. And Sherry, you're one of our amazing keynote speakers. Tell us a little bit about what you're going to speak about that day. And I know that you got a good time slot there. You're at the beginning of the day. So what are you going to speak about?
Well, all things housing and finance, and the extraordinary changes we've seen and are likely to continue to see. I mean, everything about this period is without precedent, and the central banks around the world, not just in Canada, are reassessing. We're very close to what will likely be the first liftoff in policy rates. And that means that short-term interest rates will rise. We've already seen long-term interest rates rising. And the banks, the central banks everywhere, most especially in Canada, have made it very clear that once we hit full employment, they will increase overnight rates. And so that's a big change from the last couple of years. The housing market, of course, has been booming in the last couple of years, a great surprise to many given COVID and lockdowns, et cetera. But it's the major driver of economic activity and since March of 2020. So higher interest rates normally slows housing, but there's an offsetting factor, a mitigating factor, which is this incredible dearth of housing supply in Canada, exacerbated in large by immigration. And unlike most other countries in the world, the Canadian borders are wide open for immigrants. More than 400,000 new immigrants arrived in 2021, and even more are expected this year as well. And these people, whether they rent or buy, they have to live somewhere, and that puts further upward pressure on prices, and it just makes the supply shortfall even bigger. So, it's a real balancing act that is unfortunately not something that the government, at least the federal government, has a handle on. So, it's going to be a very interesting year and coming years. The underlying fundamentals for Canada continue to be very positive.
Yeah. Sherry, when we look at, here's my experience, and we haven't talked about this. So when we look at what's happening in the world, we talk about, everybody's looking for somebody to blame or something to blame for this crazy housing market. It's low interest rates, it's immigration, it's foreign buyers, it's supply and demand. And if the government would just get off their butts and do something about supply issues, it'd be all handled. And I look at it and I say, it's not any one thing, but people's propensity is to look for the thing, and there isn't the thing. It's a very nuanced conversation, and I know, or I suspect you'll be opening up that conversation at the conference, so that we can actually put some of these pieces together and understand, so that real estate investors understand there isn't one thing. We have to look at a much bigger picture, and that's one of the reasons that we want to talk to people like you. Is that a fair view of the world, do you think?
Yes, absolutely. And there's tremendous interconnectedness globally, as we've seen so painfully with the virus. Nothing happens in isolation. It's not just what is in Toronto that will affect the GTA, or what is in Vancouver that will affect the GVA. I mean, it is global. And things like supply chain problems, which sounds so esoteric that it couldn't possibly affect our day-to-day lives, indeed does. And same thing with labor shortages, and same thing with policies in parts of the world that maybe we thought were hard to find on a map. So generally, I think more and more, it's a very complex world. All of it is beyond our control. And that's true for what the federal government, the local governments, the municipal governments, and certainly the ordinary household. And it's unnerving. I mean, it is very, it's hard to deal with.
There's JG, I know you've got a question, but I have to go. I want to, when we talk about, because you brought it up, Vancouver, Toronto, kind of the center of Canada's universe is those two, Toronto primarily, but even Vancouver when it comes to housing. Everything gets lumped into this big pot called average. And of course, Toronto, Vancouver bring up those averages and really seem to impact the whole world of Canada, the world of Canada, that is. Do you look at things, when you look at things economically, do you really start to break down what's happening provincially? So in other words, do you see one province being maybe a little bit more, I'll use the word risky, than let's say another province? You look at Ontario versus, Alberta or Saskatchewan, for example, or do you right now just look at the overarching and think about, all boats rise on a high tide? Or do you break it down provincially?
Well, I do break it down provincially because that's how we think. And people want to know, and I'm doing a forecast, not just what is the Canadian CPI, let's say, inflation, but what's it doing in my neighborhood. But we all know that real estate is local, too, and that location is all important everywhere. So inherently, some of this is particular to whichever region you live in. And who would have believed that we would have seen 35% increases in home prices in the hinterlands, far greater increase in prices and distance from city centers than in the city centers. But that's something that COVID did. And now locals in hinterlands can't afford their property taxes. So it is very definitely regional. But the big macro factors like interest rates, they don't vary regionally. The central bank doesn't say we're going to tighten for GTA, but we're not going to tighten for Saskatchewan or Alberta. And so as a result, there are some fundamentals like inflation in general and central bank policy that necessarily impacts the whole country. And in some respects, that's not the right thing for particular locations.
I like the idea. Maybe that's the solution right there, Sherry. Interest rates by postal code. Let's do it. That'll slow this thing down.
Well, then we need central banks by postal code.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, I'm not sure we want to handle more than one central bank. I'm not sure.
Not to mention more than one federal government, right?
No more government, please.
Abort. Sherry, one of the things that you said a couple different things there. I mean, off camera a while ago, we were talking about, central banks becoming inflation fighters, which is like a interesting use of language there. And they're going to make decisions in and around inflation. Patrick and I have been talking about inflation literally since the beginning of COVID. Been talking about what's coming, and I can't wait for you to dig into inflation more. And the other thing that I know you're passionate about, and you talked about a little bit here, is what we often call these cascading effects. How one thing, which, you know, as a real estate investor, you have to understand how these different components, whether it's macro components or micro components, and quite frankly, both, how they interconnect and how one has an effect on another. And these cascading effects really ripple across the economy. And this is what COVID has done. COVID has really shone a spotlight on all these cascading effects. And I can't wait to see the amazing data you're going to bring forth. And I imagine there's going to be plenty of charts and plenty of numbers to look at. So I'm really looking forward to it, Sherry.
Thank you. Good. If you're a data junkie, this is for you.
That's it. And I know that you enjoy some Q&A in your presentations as well. You like that part of it, and you're so good at it. So, you know, folks, make sure you get registered for Rethinking Real Estate. Click on the link inside here. Dr. Sherry Cooper is joining us. She's an amazing speaker, very, very off the charts in terms of her abilities as an economist, but as a presenter. And that Q&A part's going to be fun too. It always is.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Sherry. Folks, as Patrick mentioned, register right away. The event is going to be for sure sold out. It's already pretty close to sold out. Make sure you get registered right away. And also, one thing I wanted to mention is that Dr. Sherry Cooper is uniquely positioned as an economist working with Dominion Lending. I mean, you know, Dominion Lending's in the trenches. I mean, you guys are the largest in the country by far in Canada. You're in the trenches. You see things from a different perspective, and that's what we love about you. So thank you so much, Dr. Sherry Cooper, for the keynote and for spending your time with us today and as well at the conference. Folks, get signed up. Rethink Real Estate Conference, January 22nd. Click on the link, get the details, and get signed up. Patrick, thank you very much. Dr. Sherry Cooper, thank you so much.
Thanks,
You're
JP.
welcome.